Summer gardens can be lush and abundant, but September is one of the most magical times of the year here in Florida because it is finally time to start planting our fall crops, which means a lot more veggies and fruits that we're used to from the grocery store, as well as a little bit more tame and organized of a garden. We are going to be going over several of my top picks of what to start from seed in September, so let's dive in. Okay, so behind me I have lots of cover crops growing towards the end of summer. It's a great way to usher in the fall season. So I don't have a lot of our cooler weather crops growing because it's not cool yet, which means most of the varieties that I'm recommending that you start growing are going to be best suited for starting in pots so that they're ready to transplant into the garden as the weather finally starts to cool. And my first pick is one of the very first leafy greens that I get to harvest every single year, and that is Tokyo Bacana. Now, Tokyo Bacana is technically a Chinese cabbage, but it doesn't really taste or look like cabbage. Tokyo Bacana is more of, in my personal opinion, like a romaine. It's a nice heading cabbage lettuce that has a thick rib, just like a romaine was. It's delicious and mild in salads, nice tender leaves, and this will produce so much for you that you're not gonna know what to do with it, on top of it being the first leafy green of the fall season every single year for me. It is much more willing to grow and not be bitter in those weeks and months leading up to it actually getting cool. So this is a great curb season crop for you to plant in your September garden. I just love flowers, and because I am a no spray garden, they play an integral role in my organic garden. These zinnias here are gorgeous, but they aren't edible. Wouldn't it be nice to have beauty and edibility? That is where nasturtium comes in. Not only are the flowers edible, but also the leaves. They make a really good arugula substitute. They kind of have that like spicy, peppery taste to the leaves and the flowers as well. So I love to plant nasturtium. They have both bush and vining types. I typically like to grow the ones that vine just because it's really pretty to have them draping over garden beds or kind of winding their way up a trellis, but all of them fill that niche of both beauty, pollinator support, beneficial insect support, as well as food. Lots of different colors, so pick your favorite and go with it. There's no right or wrong here. I do have one suggestion or tip though. Some people can have a little bit of difficulty getting nasturtium seeds started. They have a very thick outside hull or coating on the seed, and so if you take a nail file or if you have like a workshop, any sort of file, and you just gently scrape away at the seed until it goes from brown to white, that will help to speed the germination and you'll likely see much better success rates. So one of the funny things when you have been working in a garden for a very long time is that you get lots of volunteers. I was sitting here trying to figure out what plant to sit next to demonstrate to you all what we're working with, and I noticed husk cherry, also known as ground cherry. Pleasant surprise. I'm sure my girls will be thrilled to know that we have some growing in the garden again. But my recommendation for seeds to start in September is ground cherries. Now these are something you may not have heard of before. It's in the same family as tomatillos. It has that little like wrapping paper husk on the outside of it, but they're much smaller and much sweeter than tomatillos. It is really good to eat out of hand, almost as a fruit substitute rather than a vegetable-like flavor. They also make phenomenal preserves or jams with the ground cherries because it already has that nice balance of sweet to acidity. You don't have to add as much added sugar to it, which we personally try to do with our jams and jellies, so it makes a really nice preserve. But honestly, I barely make it because my girls typically eat them as soon as they are ripe. So definitely a nice one to add into your garden. I would recommend, although this was a volunteer, I would recommend starting them in pots at this point and transplant them end of September, beginning of October into your garden, and you will have a lovely harvest a few weeks after that. So my summer cover crop blend has a blend of 5 different plants in it. It has more millet, sorghum, cowpea, sun hemp, and marigold, all of which add a little something different to the soil, helps protect it from weeds, erosion, compaction, all that good stuff. But one of those 5 is marigolds, and that is a beautiful addition not only to your summer garden, but your fall and winter garden as well. Now, there's 2 different kinds of marigolds. There's French marigolds and there's African marigolds. African marigolds, like the ones here that I have growing in my summer garden, are better adapted to heat. They're also much bigger plants. The French marigolds, however, do better in cooler weather, and they're a little bit more compact. So typically what I like to do in my garden is have my African marigolds growing over the summer months, and then French marigolds growing in the fall and winter season. They're much better adapted to those growing conditions. So why even bother planting marigolds? These are scientifically proven to naturally reduce nematode populations. Nematodes are a huge issue here in our Florida gardens and anywhere that is subtropical or tropical. I have an entire video that goes over how to handle nematodes. I'll have that down in the show notes in case you need to check that out. But what's important to note, and a very common misconception, is that tomatoes, which are sensitive to marigolds, you should plant the marigolds with the tomatoes, right? Because then it gets rid of the nematodes, which would otherwise bother your tomatoes. Not true. It's the chemical compounds in the leaves. It's very, very minimally, if at all, excreted through the root system. So just having your marigold plant growing next to your tomatoes is pretty much going to do nothing. What you need to do with marigolds is to actually chop and drop that material and allow it to decompose around those plants. So just a side tip, pro tip for growing your marigolds and actually using them in that manner. So if you remember at the beginning of this video, I mentioned that pretty much all of these should be started in pots or starter trays. This is the one exception to that rule because we are going to be planting beans, and beans or legumes are something that generally has a pretty sensitive root system and they don't do well with transplanting sometimes. So I always like to direct sow them where I'm going to be growing them out to their final stage. There are a few caveats with beans in the fall months though. What I'm going to recommend now for September is planting a bush bean. If you plant in early September, these will be ready for you to harvest for your Thanksgiving dinner, which is just a super fun way to contribute a homegrown meal to the table. But it's also a shorter lived plant. So bush beans are something that produces a lot and then dies away naturally, which is why it's well timed to growing in this season. If you want longer production beans for green beans, heading into our shorter, cooler days, the alternative would be a winged bean. Those are not daylight sensitive and they grow for a longer period of time. So if you are planting beans in the fall months, I would definitely recommend either a bush bean or that winged bean. Now, winged beans may not be as familiar to you. If you haven't heard yet, I do have a seed shop which has a curated collection of seeds, everything that I shared here in this video, as well as a lot more. I'll have a link down in the show notes for you to check out the seed shop, and the purchases that you make there do help to support and fund all of these awesome videos for you guys to check out and learn about growing food in the city and in Florida. So my favorite variety of bush bean is contender bush bean. It's exactly like Blue Lake, which is the all famous, very well known bush bean. These are just a little bit better adapted to our growing conditions and pretty much what I always grow when I'm growing bush beans. So when we are growing alternative leafy greens, it can be different than what we're used to seeing in the store. And a lot of people over these summer months will hear the recommendation to grow Malabar spinach, and they try it and it gets that slimy okra vibe texture to it and they can't stand it. This is another unique leafy green that you can grow in the summer months. And if you've ever grown purslane, this is something that kind of sort of might fall into that mucilaginous texture, but to me it's more watery than slimy. The New Zealand spinach, which is what I would recommend starting in September, is quite similar to the purslane. It's more of a watery texture than a slimy texture. So if the mucilaginous flavor or texture has been a turnoff for you in the past, I would still recommend trying New Zealand spinach. It's definitely not a lettuce, although I do substitute it or mix it in with my salad blends in the fall months, but it's just a really easy to grow leafy green. If you live along the coastlines, this is also salt tolerant. This is actually natively grown or found along the beaches. So if you are worried about tidal surge, or if you have the winds blow salt spray into your yard over the winter months, this is a fantastic choice for a leafy green that can handle those growing conditions. Now this is kind of a crawler sprawler. It kind of branches out, it's not upright. It's not necessarily a ground cover, although it can kind of fall into that category. So it just kind of lends itself and winds itself around the garden. With that said, I usually plant it on the edge of my planters, perhaps in a vertical garden where you can have it drape over. It does really well in this scenario as well. And just cut it back as often as you want as a fresh eating green or also as a cooked green. So the last recommendation that I have for you is another leafy green. I am a huge fan of leafy greens because they are so easy to grow in a small space and they give you so much nutritional bang for your buck. I mean, we're talking about over half of its nutrients being depleted within a week of being harvested. So why not grow some leafy greens in the garden? I like fresh greens as well as cooked greens, and my next recommendation is going to be similar to this chaya plant. It is used pretty much strictly as a cooked green, although you can blanch them and make a nice wrap with the large leaves. My recommendation for what to start in September is going to be collard greens. Now, collard greens are something that grows so well here. There are entire collard green festivals in the South for good reason. They are easy to grow. So if all you've had is the boiled with a chicken neck and super heavy, greasy, salty, there are lots of other ways to prepare collard greens. So I would really recommend and encourage you to give it a try. You might be pleasantly surprised. Those wraps do really well. They crunch. They add flavor as opposed to that heavier, more traditional Southern collard greens recipe. You have the giant collard greens that you may be familiar with from the store where you have entire trash bags full of leaves to make your meal, but they also have much more compact ones that are great additions to vertical gardens and smaller raised bed areas. So whatever your space is, there is a collard green for you. These ones are Georgia green, which is a very traditional collard green. They get very large leaves. Green glaze is another option. All of these collard green choices are in the seed shop, so if you need some collard greens for this season, make sure to check it out. If you are a leafy green fan like I am, fresh in salads, smoothies, whatever, or cooked, you'll definitely want to check out this video next, which shares my top picks for your fall and winter leafy greens.